States, one of the highest-ranking democratically elected officials in this country, Senator Rand Paul. Let's look at that. Not just cowardly and pathetic to attack a man who's already been the victim of violence from the left late at night as he tries to get his wife safely home. Say her name, they screamed at him. They're talking about Breonna Taylor, a woman who was killed as the result of a no-knock warrant. The events which transpired on the 5th of March are hotly disputed, even in the words of the New York Times. But Senator Rand Paul was the sponsor of the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. He literally wrote the legislation in June and has spoken to Taylor's family about his quest to end no-knock warrants in the United States. What have those screeching protesters done? What have they achieved? What real world, instead of fantasy land shrieking, actions have they taken? The mob isn't just angry, violent, and reprehensible. They're also dumb, like really dumb. Imagine attacking the senator who drafted the legislation directly related to your cause, morons. These scenes were not the only ones to shock last night. Most of the media and their Democratic Party friends were shocked by the scale of the Trump speech on the White House lawn and the ensuing fireworks. It was immense. And Donald Trump, President Trump, directly addressed Joe Biden's BS claims about the darkness America finds itself in.
Because we understand that America is not a land cloaked in darkness. America is the torch that enlightens the entire world. Gathered here at our beautiful and majestic White House, known all over the world as the People's House, we cannot help but marvel at the miracle that is our great American story. This has been the home of larger-than-life figures like Teddy Roosevelt and Andrew Jackson, who rallied Americans to bold visions of a bigger and brighter future. Within these walls lived tenacious generals like President Grant and Eisenhower, who led our soldiers in the cause of freedom. From these grounds, Thomas Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark on a daring expedition to cross a wild and uncharted continent. In the depths of a bloody civil war, President Abraham Lincoln looked out these very windows upon a half-completed Washington Monument and asked God, in his providence, to save our nation. 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt welcomed Winston Churchill, and just inside, they set our people on a course to victory in the Second World War.
Incredible scenes last night. And when we come back from the break, we're going to contrast the end of both conventions, compare and contrast the DNC and the RNC, and we'll talk about what the media is trying to tell us about the viewership numbers, and I'll explain all of that. Natalie Winters will join me here in studio at the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam. This is the National Pulse, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, joined by Natalie Winters here in studio. I want to compare and contrast the visuals from last night and last week. The DNC was small, it was lame, it lacked gravitas, because big shows require big ideas, and big ideas lead to big purpose. The Democratic Party has no purpose, apart from burning down the cities and lauding criminals over law enforcement. I want you to look at how the Democrats celebrated the end of their convention versus how the Republicans ended theirs. Big ideas and big purpose. That's what America saw last night. That's why the media and the Democrats are panicking today. I'm going to go through more of this with you. You'll see the scenes from last night as we roll the B-roll throughout this show, and more of the RNC's stunning conclusion. Natalie Winters joins us here to talk about another big breaking news story about a Republican senator who endorsed Joe Biden and his links to the Chinese Communist Party. I want to jump right back into the darkness. I want to get some of these clips to roll over the chat that we'll be having here in the studio for the rest of this hour between Natalie Winters and I. And I want to start off with this, Natalie. As we were coming into studio today, I mean, Washington, D.C. is barely traversable right now. You've got all of the marchers, everything, the roads are closed, you can't drive on the streets. We saw the scenes from last night, and CNN is focusing on the viewership between the RNC and the DNC, which, by the way, is a conversation I'm more than willing to have. But they are making the assertion that over the course of the 4 nights, and these are early viewership numbers still from last night, so it may well change, that the RNC got slightly fewer viewers than the DNC did. And I'm calling BS on that. And the reason I'm calling BS on that is because CNN and the Nielsen ratings aren't taking into account that conservatives, and actually just a lot of Americans, were so sick to death of having to listen to Karl Rove or Dana Bash cutting into the convention that they flipped over to the C-SPAN, to the America's Voice links, to the right side broadcasting, all of these web URLs and web links that you can now watch on your TV, on your smart TV, either on YouTube or somewhere else. So these numbers aren't what CNN is claiming that they are.
Well, it's a particularly telling moment. You bring up CNN. When on the third night of the Republican National Convention, they cut away from the dissident from China who had suffered at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And for followers of the National Pulse, they've known that we've put up a host of exclusives and reporting on how CNN is deeply in bed with the Chinese Communist Party, having a revolving door between that outlet and Chinese state media. So it's certainly interesting when you see these networks cutting away from really moving and compelling speeches like those, like other telling tales from the McCloskeys. Even last night, the story of the daughter of that amazing couple who was taken hostage by ISIS and later killed, as they said, had Trump been president, that wouldn't have happened. Now, there's no secret why CNN, MSNBC wouldn't want to air those clips.
And they've been actively sabotaging the viewership. The difference is now, and I'm not whining, what I'm doing is saying great, because people are finally starting to wake up to the fact that you can change the channel. You no longer have to watch these things on CNN. You no longer have to watch these things on Fox. Fox was cutting away for people to listen to what Karl Rove was talking about in the middle of the speeches in the convention on day 2. And I'm not being funny. I don't care. I just do not care what Karl Rove has to say. Here on America's Voice, we did uninterrupted coverage of the convention on all 4 days, and that's the distinction now. That's the difference between the legacy media and the new media. The new media actually trusts and just wants the people to make their own minds up. See it for yourself, make your own mind up. We've got about 1 minute 30 here. Just tease the story we're going to discuss later on in the show.
Sure. So a former defense secretary and Republican senator and congressman, Bill Cohen, who endorsed Joe Biden just a few days ago, saying that President Trump was a tyrant and a dictator. Well, he actually runs an eponymous consulting group that has extensive links to the Chinese Communist Party, not only employing former party members as high-level executives, but he's visited China several times, and even former and current vice presidents of the company have gone on to participate in Chinese state media interviews, and that scratches the surface.
Okay, good. We're going to get into that story and a whole lot more after the next break. This is the National Pulse, and also on this show today, I'm going to be reading out the names of some of our, not full names because they'll get doxxed and harassed, but the names of some of our supporters at the National Pulse. You can support the National Pulse by going to our website, thenationalpulse.com/support, and we'll be thanking some of the people who have been recently contributing, recently joining up as a member on the National Pulse. Everything's free to read, but you get extras from us for being part of the family and helping us do our work. A live Discord chat channel with us, a monthly town hall, a nice red baseball cap, and more. Make sure that you're tuned in to the National Pulse, not just here on America's Voice. Make sure you're downloading the America's Voice app on Roku, on Pluto. We're everywhere. We're trying to be everywhere. That's why we get so many technical difficulties. But we're fixing all of those. We'll be back with you with more National Pulse after this break. Well, Joe Biden's Republican endorser of the last couple of days seems to employ Chinese Communist Party officials. But before we get to that exclusive story, it's up live now on thenationalpulse.com. Before we get to that with Natalie, I do want to get Natalie's take on broader politics, what we've seen over the last 2 weeks. You know, I can't help but, and I'll tell the audience this as well, because I think sometimes they don't get a full perspective of what our lives are like here in Washington, D.C. But for instance, last night, you know, having to see people, having to go out to the Trump Hotel, which isn't an easy place to visit anymore. Certainly not while the protests are going on, and certainly not while it's so busy in town, busy from people coming in to go and see President Trump at the White House at the big ceremony that took place last night, and busy from all the protesters coming in into town, blocking the roads and blocking the way in, and it really creates a security situation. But sitting there, I want to paint a picture for people, sitting there in that massive golden adorned lobby, where you could only really have seating, there was no people at the bar, usually that place is packed. You know, there was a real sense of reverence, a real sense of history that I think struck. I've never sort of heard it that quiet in there when there's an event going on. Even if it was the State of the Union or something, there'd still be people, you know, they're drinking, they're laughing, they're talking, they're socializing. Not everyone usually is paying super close attention to what's on the screens and what's being pumped through the speakers into the hotel lobby. But last night, there was almost pin drop silence in there. And I think people understood the gravity, the weight of the situation that America faces, the choices that are abundantly clear to Republicans and supporters of President Trump, and less clear, by the way, to people who support Joe Biden. We know he has an enthusiasm gap. We know he doesn't have that much support behind him as a person. His support tends to be from people who just don't like Trump. And they would have supported any Democratic candidate were that the case. They could have pinned a ribbon on a donkey and it would have got the same endorsement as Joe Biden's getting from his own base right now. But Natalie, I want you to juxtapose, tell me what, because I saw the DNC as like super lame and tiny and fragile, almost, just like Joe Biden's whole presentation, his whole demeanor. And the RNC was big, it was booming, it was loud, there were fireworks bigger than the 4th of July. I'll stop talking now. I'm just giving you a lecture here. What did you think?
I have to say, last night, and frankly the whole RNC, was really contained some of the moments where I've been proudest to be a supporter of the president. I think these last 4 nights, especially President Trump's speech, really epitomizes what this administration has been attempting to accomplish in their 4 years. Frankly, retrofitting the Republican Party to become a party that speaks for American workers and not the elite, not the permanent political class, and certainly not the establishment. And you didn't only see that by the people that they chose to have as speakers at the RNC, right? In contrast, the DNC love to have a who's who of Hollywood and all these politicians, these limousine liberals that average Americans don't identify with, whereas the RNC just had average, everyday, patriotic Americans. But what's also interesting is that the RNC really hammered and highlighted how President Trump is not only trying to end the abuse of America on the world stage at the hands of bodies like NATO, even the Chinese Communist Party, which again is an issue that was not given any attention at the DNC. I believe throughout the entire convention they mentioned China 5 times, one of which was from Andrew Cuomo calling the virus the European virus and saying that the White House was wrong to focus on China. And Joe Biden mentioned China once in his speech culminating the DNC, in which he actually said that we need to reshore PPE and prescription drugs from, quote, China and other countries. So we couldn't even single out China. And again, we don't even want to just reshore PPE and prescription drugs. We want to reshore all jobs, our entire manufacturing base, which is something that the Trump campaign repeatedly hammered at the RNC. And I think also what you saw at the RNC, which again speaks to what this administration has been doing for 4 years, is that for so long the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, they've essentially been two sides of the same coin, right? They're the establishment. At the end of the day, they serve their lobbyists, paymasters, special interests, big tech, you name it. But President Trump has fundamentally shifted the Republican Party to not represent the elite class that Joe Biden is the epitome of, but to represent everyday Americans, the forgotten Americans, and really the silent majority.
Right. Yeah, I think there's so much to last night that it doesn't even hit you immediately. I went back and read it. I obviously listened and watched the speech last night. I went back and read it this morning. And there was just so much in there that because of the way that President Trump's intonation is when he's reading from a prompter, you know, excuse me, I prefer him more extemporaneous, right? I think most people do. But when he's reading from a prompter, that's because there's a specific message he wants to get across and specific lines that he needs to say. It's the history of the moment that he's trying to appeal to there, and I think he does a very good job, but the intonation changes. And I think some things get lost in the way that that's presented. And when you go back and you read these speeches as well, and I implore everyone to do so, if you go back and print it off or read it on your laptop, if you can do that. I can't do that. I have to print things off and I have to have a little highlighter. But if you read it, you come to experience almost more or different than the speech as it's delivered. And you see where the stresses are, and you see where the pauses are. These things are actually really incredibly well scripted, and I think it behooves us all to go back and fully appreciate that stuff. Natalie, what were the big standout moments for you across either of those conventions? And don't say China. We've done China. We'll get back to China, I promise you.
Oh no, you've stolen my go-to point. I think it just goes back to what I was saying, how he's reoriented the Republican Party to really fight for American workers and to fight for our fellow forgotten Americans.
You know how that really stood out to me, now that you say that? It was the point that how much they stressed at the RNC that he's not a warlike president. He doesn't want to start lots of foreign wars. He doesn't want to send troops abroad. He doesn't want to spend money that should be spent here in the United States on things that, trillions of dollars that are spent on Afghanistan infrastructure projects and Iraqi, sewage pipelines and things like that. And he wants the money spent here in the United States. And not only did they tee him up so much during the RNC, as that you heard from General Kellogg, you heard from Senator Paul on those points, but he said it yesterday in his speech as well. He made mention and made stress of the fact that he's not a warmongering president, and I just think that it means so much to people of this country who are so war weary. They're sick of the political establishment leaders, the politicians who have been going around the world like neo-imperialists, bombing whatever they like, taking whatever they like, and failing to give back anything to the American public. And it's the American public who shoulder the burdens. It's your sons and daughters that are sent into the battles. And it's you that's expected to pick up the check. We'll be right back in a second. I was going to say TGIF, but this Friday is looking pretty fractious here in Washington, D.C. It's been a pretty fractious week in some parts of the country, in Kenosha and Portland and beyond. I know there's a lot of people struggling out there as a result of Hurricane Laura as well. And I want to make sure that if you want all the best updates on that situation down in Louisiana and all the surrounding areas and states, make sure you're following Weather Nation for all the best updates. I also want to make mention of the fact that, I mean, we're live right now, and we only took this show live for the first time last week, so I'm sure that a lot of you have noticed some teething problems. But as the owner of this network once said to me, if we waited for perfection, we'd never launch a show. So I think that actually resonated with me. But we will get to perfection, I promise you. In the meantime, you got this much perfection right here. I want to make mention of the fact that the stock market is raging at the moment. It has just erased, I'm getting live news across my screen right now, just erased all of 2020's losses, and that comes a day after the President Trump's speech accepting the nomination for a second time. It's like the market almost wants Donald Trump to be president and actually fears the socialist policies of the Democratic Party. Who would have thought? Well, at the end of the show as well, we'll be making mention of some of our supporters, reading some names out of people who have gone to the nationalpulse.com/support and supported our work. We are not sponsored by any big corporates. We don't have a big budget behind us. This is all, most of it's coming out of my pocket, but this is all, it's upstart. It's something new, and it's something that entrepreneurs all around the country do every single day. So we're really grateful for everybody who's helping us do the real news. So back to the real news. I want to spend a couple of segments on this because it's very important that we unpack this. So Natalie, I want to bring you back in here. Don't want to rush through this at all.
Sure.
You teased before we went to the last break that there was a Republican senator for a very long time, but also was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense back in the days of bipartisanship, I suppose.
Yes, went from Republican congressman to then a Republican senator to then working in the Clinton administration as a Secretary of Defense. And this is really, again, a testament to the fact of how the American establishment has aided and abetted the rise of China. So Bill Cohen, the individual in question, he runs the Cohen Group. And this is a large lobbying and consulting firm that operates not only out of Washington, D.C., but also retains two offices in China. So specifically, yes.
Okay, as I say, let's go through this slowly, break it down for people, because look, not everybody knows how DC works inside. Not everybody would like to find out, frankly. From the inside, it's a miserable place. But this is not unusual for a former legislator to found his own consulting group. What is a little bit unusual about some of the detail you're about to tell us is that it's a former Secretary of Defense we're talking about here, right? This is one of the biggest positions you can have, cabinet positions. The security of the United States is at stake with this. The amount of intelligence that this person would have access to, national security information that the person would have access to, state secrets that the person would have access to, and he's been working with the Chinese Communist Party.
Sure. Well, this story is definitely egregious, particularly egregious in comparison to other consulting firms. But there's another defense secretary who actually works on behalf of the Cohen Group from the Trump administration, General James Mattis. And so the fact that federal government employees and very high-level employees have leveraged these credentials and these connections that they garnered at taxpayer expense to now sign and ink very lucrative deals with countries that were effectively in some sort of Cold War with, really is a testament to how they've sold out this country.
How are they allowed to do that? Why are they not prohibited from doing that? You can't come out from being the Secretary of Defense and then go and work and lobby for the Chinese Communist Party. I don't understand how that's not a national security threat.
You certainly shouldn't be able to, and I think it really speaks to how these individuals, these defense secretaries, were ostensibly amenable to the interests of the Chinese Communist Party while in office, because why would they want to retain these individuals as consultants, as lobbyists, if they hadn't identified them as being effective, as boosting their interests while in office? But the Cohen's Group China practice, it proudly boasts on its homepage, which again, there's actually a picture of Joe Biden featured on the homepage of the Cohen Group's website. But this group's China practice facilitates, quote, constructive engagement and cooperation between leading multinational companies and Chinese enterprises around the world, as well as, quote, supporting Chinese companies engaged in high quality investment overseas. So essentially what you're talking about is foreign direct investment, which really is a euphemism for allowing Chinese capital, which can quite often be traced back to the Chinese Communist Party. Not only oftentimes it comes from state-run, so that's wholly government-administered companies, but even the fact that any privately owned company is ostensibly a dormant state-owned enterprise waiting to just be requisitioned entirely and utterly legally by the Chinese Communist Party. But this capital flows into the United States. It's actually hit record lows under the Trump administration. In comparison, it hit record highs under Joe Biden and Barack Obama. But the Cohen Group really serves to facilitate this. And how they do that, their modus operandi, is by employing former high-level Chinese Communist Party officials as senior executives.
Okay. So you have a consulting group that exists here in DC and with offices in China. The group is led by a former senator, Republican senator, and Secretary of Defense. Has another Secretary of Defense in there. Now, we've got to be very clear about why this is important, why this is an interesting story. It's an interesting story in and of itself, but this goes to a lot of the criticism that President Trump is receiving. So William Cohen has criticized Trump pretty robustly. James Mattis has criticized President Trump incredibly robustly, made all sorts of New York Times front pages and CNN headlines as a result of it. But meanwhile, they are working with Chinese Communist Party officials. When we come back from the break, I want you to walk us through who these officials are, where they've come from, what their backgrounds are, because when I first saw this, I just thought this can't be true. This is incredible. It can't be legal. It can't be within the realms of national security for this to be happening. But it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's happening right here in the United States right now, and nobody wants to tell you about it. I want to tell you about it. Natalie Winters wants to tell you about it. But, change the channel. Don't change the channel. But if you change the channel, you watch any of the mainstream media organizations, are they talking about this? Are they doing any exclusive reporting? Do you get any investigations like this from any of the major newspapers anymore? Once upon a time, this would have been a major national scandal, and now we just accept it. Former U.S. Secretary of Defense, two of them, working with Chinese Communist Party officials. We'll get back into that story, and we've got more from the National Pulse. TheNationalPulse.com. I'm Raheem Kassam. We'll be back with you in just a second. Welcome back to the National Pulse. We're very grateful to have you. I'm very grateful for all of your shares and your support. Make sure you're tweeting this link. It's thenationalpulse.com/TV every day to watch the show live at 3 p.m. And also you can find it on America's Voice. You can find America's Voice at americasvoice.news, on the America's Voice app, on Roku, on Pluto. You can put it all on your TV now. You don't have to watch us on your small devices, because frankly, when I look this good, you want it in 4K. Isn't that right, Natalie?
Yeah.
Sure. Feeling particularly rambunctious today. It's Friday. It's a really, really fraught Friday here in Washington, D.C. And I think it makes everybody a bit jittery, a little bit nervous. There's a lot of nervous energy in town. You can sense it. You can feel it. You saw it on the televisions earlier. A lot of these scenes from what's taking place, people wading around in the reflecting pool outside the Lincoln Memorial, and we had trouble even getting to the studio today, given how many roads are blocked off, and we're expecting quite a lot of problems tonight, especially downtown. A lot of the downtown businesses have already boarded up in anticipation for this. I mean, what a sad state of affairs, especially in the country, one of the only countries in the world that so firmly and robustly guarantees the right to protest, the right to free speech, that it would be abused in such a way that protest is now looting. They've become inseparable from each other because of this one group or one ideology over several different groups that seek to abuse this. And you saw the scenes of Senator Rand Paul, you saw the scenes of people who were in the White House to watch their elected president give a speech whereby he was, these are the democratic institutions that we're talking about that are under attack from the new brown shirts, the foot soldiers of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. This is domestic terrorism that we're seeing here in the United States now. There's another part of this whole package that you're looking at very closely, and that's the foreign interference and all this stuff. And there's a heck of a lot of it. And it's not just that foreign powers are interfering in US elections, in US policy in general. It's that they're being welcomed in and helped in by people who leached off the taxpayers, supposed public servants, 2 of them at the Cohen Group. Tell us more.
Sure. So in addition to having James Mattis and Bill Cohen on staff, they have at least 2 former very high-level Chinese Communist Party members. One example is Xiaorong Wu, who serves as the company's Beijing Deputy Chief Representative, and while working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, again, a government that has been identified as seeking a Joe Biden victory come 2020, he actually spearheaded China's Era of Sovereignty campaign, and he oversaw the transfer of Hong Kong into the Communist Party's hands. Another individual, another actual chief representative at the Cohen Group, joined the group in 2007 and boasted nearly a decade-long tenure working at a municipal government, again, at the Chinese Communist Party. This individual frequently hosted meetings with foreign officials in order to foster stronger political and economic ties between Tianjin and state governments in the United States. And that quote that I read from you is directly from the Cohen Group's website, which is ridiculous that they're not even trying to hide this. In fact, they're proudly displaying this front and center on their website. And similarly, Bill Cohen has also visited China several times. So as Congressman, Senator, and Secretary of Defense, he visited China. Prior to relationships being normalized, he actually helped lay the groundwork for in 1979 us to diplomatically recognize the country. But Cohen, even in 2009, really lobbied the Obama administration to take a softer approach on the Chinese Communist Party. He actually wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal entitled "The World Depends on U.S.-China Cooperation," where he insisted that the 2 countries, again, a beacon of freedom, America and the Communist Party of China, actually had, quote, many shared interests. And believe it or not, in addition, in 2011 and 2018, Cohen, on behalf of the Cohen Group, visited China. He actually visited the country's basically equivalent of the White House to have a meeting with an individual from a government-funded think tank where they, again, discussed the prospect of foreign direct investment, how to essentially pump more Chinese and, frankly, Chinese Communist Party money into the United States.
I want to ask you something, Natalie. We've got about 2 minutes left here. I want to ask you something not entirely related to this, but about your coverage of this sort of stuff in general. And then the next segment, I want to get into what Cohen said about President Trump and the assertions he's making about President Trump, and then juxtapose them with his record. But my question for you, and I think a lot of the audience wonder this as well, is why does it take you to find this out? Why aren't these investigations going on at other news outlets? Why are these investigations? And I understand that the CNNs have links to the Chinese Communist Party, but at the end of the day, there are other news outlets that don't. There are US news outlets. There are ones that aren't compromised. There are conservative news outlets that still don't do this kind of digging. And I think a lot of people want to understand, well, is this as big a deal as Natalie Winters is making it out to be? Because if nobody else is covering it, then why should they take it seriously?
Well, it certainly is a big deal, and what you're talking about, the fact that how even conservative outlets really kind of neglect this issue, it's a testament to how the Chinese Communist Party has been successful in how they wage war, which is very under the radar. It's through economic warfare, disinformation warfare, propaganda campaigns. It's the point that, the White House is never going to fly the Chinese flag, right? The United States is never going to be, or most likely not, invaded on the ground warfare, kinetic warfare with China, but it's the point that every prescription drug that someone who works in the White House takes will be manufactured in China. Every suit that someone's wearing in the White House is made in China. The apps that their kids use when they go home gives data to the Chinese Communist Party. The building materials that we build and make additions to the buildings with, they're all made in China. So even though we're not flying the Chinese flag and it's not a boots on the ground warfare, it's this underhanded way that America is entirely subservient to the Chinese Communist Party.
It's incredible, and it just sounds like the plot of a Hollywood disaster movie. You've seen so much of this over the last couple of decades as it pertains to other threats to the United States, but it doesn't seem like we're taking this one as seriously as we need to be. I want to make sure that everyone in the audience out there knows that they can get this show on Pluto, on Roku. Make sure you can get it on YouTube. We'll be adding other distribution partners and platforms in the coming days to make sure that the stream is steady and available every day here at 3 p.m. When we come back, we'll get into what William Cohen said about President Trump and how hypocritical it is, given that he's willing to work with Chinese Communist Party officials. This is the National Pulse. I am Raheem Kassam, and we will be right back. we're going to be talking about some of our members at the end of this show, thanking them for their efforts. They're in a Discord live chat group with us all the time. They get mailed a signed copy of my book. They get the red Make Families Great Again baseball hat and a whole lot more for just supporting the National Pulse. And right now we've put up a deal for you as well, 2 months free if you pay for the whole year's worth of support. And again, nothing's behind a paywall. We want the world to read our reporting. We want the world to read Natalie Winter's amazing exclusives and investigations into the Chinese Communist Party. But we also do, I'm aware that you know that things like this cost money, and I'm very grateful that all of you out there who have supported us so far. We have nearly, I think, 300 people out there who have started supporting us in the last couple of weeks. So we're incredibly grateful for that. Natalie, we've got a couple of minutes left here. William Cohen, this guy, he comes out against President Trump. But here's something he said which really stuck out to me, how hypocritical this man is, given that he works with Chinese Communist Party officials. He said, quote, "I don't believe any president should have absolute power. That's the whole purpose of our system, is checks and balances to make sure no branch got distinctly too powerful that it was dominant in our society." The Chinese Communist Party doesn't have checks and balances at its core. So what is he talking about?
No, and he also called President Trump a tyrant and said that the administration bears the mark of a dictatorship. Again,
well, he would know.
Yeah, exactly. He would know because he's upfront and personal, up close and personal with the Chinese Communist Party, not only in a host of meetings, but even the Cohen Group has also participated in the Harvard Ash Center's China Leaders in Development program.
We use the jet to carry our wounded warriors around. Today we're in Akron, Ohio to visit our Akron store. Our Akron store is owned by 3 generations of Morans, Fred, son Pat, and his 2 children, Patrick and Amanda.
The mini blinds are in between the glass. It's all custom made.
Tammy was here yesterday, jumped out of the airplane. I thought that was great.
Let's do this.
We volunteer with an organization.
Communist Party, rule of tyranny and dictatorial rule.
It's extraordinary stuff. All right, Natalie, I want you to give our audience an idea of what you're working on at the moment, what's coming next. What are you looking into apart from going through every FARA filing that's ever been sent in? I mean, this is extraordinary work that she does, ladies and gentlemen, because it's the most boring and tedious documents you could ever think of in your life. The lawyers out there will know what I'm talking about, but Natalie goes through them all. But what else are we looking at over the next coming week?
Well, I would say that Kamala Harris's husband should be on the lookout for a pretty explosive scoop coming on his links and his law firm's links to the Chinese Communist Party. Also, a candidate out in California has an interesting piece coming his way, as also does a television company that operates in tens of millions of American homes, has also similarly links to the Chinese Communist Party and even Huawei. So that's what's on the radar just for tonight, but who knows?
Watch what you tweet, watch who you're FARA registered with, because Natalie Winters will be after you. Natalie, just tell the audience where they can find more from you, where they can support your work.
Sure, my Twitter is Natalie G. Winters, and thenationalpulse.com/Natalie is how you can support my exclusives.
We've got to get you some other social media platforms as well. You can't be relying on just Twitter. I know your Twitter following is exploding at the moment, but that's even more reason that they'll try and turn that off and turn your Twitter off. So we've got to find other platforms for you to be on. I find my Facebook page, by the way, the National Pulse Facebook page and the Raheem Kassam Facebook page drive a lot of traffic. A lot of people still use that. A lot of conservatives still use that because they can't stand being on Twitter and similar. So I know Facebook isn't much better, but I know it's one of those legacy platforms that a lot of people still use. One of the things I want to get to just before we go, and I'm so glad it's the weekend, allows us to kind of reset and figure out where we're going for the week. There is a lot of news coming out in the next week. There are a lot of things that we'll see over this weekend, I assure you. And of course, President Trump will be hitting the campaign trail. We'll be covering it all here on America's Voice. We have correspondents out in the field, lots of different studios operating all over the place. I know I give the production team a hard time sometimes when I understand how many balls are in the air at any given time. When you're building a whole brand new network, you know, I've built sites my entire life, and we'll be bringing you rally coverage tonight, I'm getting told in my ear, so make sure you stay here at America's Voice for all of that. But one thing I do want to do before we leave you is thank some of our supporters out there, because we just genuinely wouldn't be able to do what we do without your support. We have 2 tiers of supportership at the National Pulse, and I want to read some names out for you. Joseph, I'm not going to give you the full names because, you know, people will start doxing people and visiting their houses and telling off their employers and such. I want to read out Joseph A. and Laurie F. and Susanna P. and Jordan C. and Marilyn S. and Nick K. and Stuart D. and George K. and Kevin S. and Josh G. and James J. and Linda O. And there's so many more of you out there, and we'll get to it every week here on the show to read out the names of our supporters, because I think it's really important when we ask you to do something for us and you do it and you support us, that we show you the respect and admiration and thanks back for everything that you're doing here. So thank you once again, and for all of you who have been supporting us at the War Room as well, we're very grateful for it. We're obviously pushing forward on the show every single day at 10 a.m. in that War Room over on Capitol Hill here downtown in Washington DC as well. We're going to be following everything that takes place over the course of this weekend and into the next week. It's an incredibly fractious time here in the United States. The election looms even closer, and as Steve Bannon always says on the show, November 3rd is not election day. It is simply the last day you're allowed to vote in this election. People are already voting up and down the country. People are already making up their minds. People are already mailing in their ballots. So November 3rd is the last one. And I'll say something that I said on the show this morning on the War Room if you missed it. It's so incredibly important. It's imperative that you guys out there, if you want this to be a free and fair election, you have to take part in it. You can go to your local county's elections website, find it on the internet, and register to be an election official, not a party agent, but an election official, because we know how much the Democratic Party, along with their allies in the media, along with Antifa, and along with the Chinese Communist Party and others, are going to try and render Donald Trump's victory on November the 3rd null and void, and we know how they're going to do it as well, and only you can stop it. So get out there, make sure that you're involved in it. Being an active citizen is the most important thing you can do. In the meantime, I guess we'll see you back on Monday at 3 p.m. here on America's Voice. I'm Raheem Kassam, from Natalie Winters and myself and the whole team. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.